morning. You can hear my voice is starting to go. So hopefully it will stay up. How many people maybe stayed up a little bit too late last night? Yeah, okay, good. And you guys actually showed up, yeah. Me too, I think, but that's why this is a perfect talk to start it with, because this is actually like really, really fun stuff. So this is all about Webpack Encore, Pro JavaScript and CSS for all my friends. That means you. I didn't actually say who I was yesterday. I primarily work on the documentation in Symfony, and then sometimes when really smart core developers make something, I will make it a little bit easier. So I do like the less technical things. And also SymfonyLive's Blackfire evangelist and fanboy, basically. And I'm the main author on Camp University, which I know a lot of you guys use, and I hope you do use it. Actually, there's, in case I forget to mention it, we do have a Webpack tutorial on Camp University if you want to take this further. And then sometime in the future, we'll also have a Webpack Encore tutorial on Camp University. Oh, and of course, husband of the much more talented and amazing and awesome Leanna Pelham, who is not here. But you should tweet at her, because she's not here and wants to be here. I have lots of friends here. All of my friends here like her better. So it's really like, I really shouldn't be here. She should be here. She is watching our son. So I'm also the father of my much more handsome son, Beckett. Here's some pictures of him, because I get to show pictures of my son now. And you guys have to look at them. There's another one. But really, like, people ask me, okay, how is it to have a son? Is it amazing? And I'm like, it is amazing. Like, he's such a cool dude. He's my favorite. I totally drank the Kool-Aid. It was not that way in the beginning. He was horrible in the beginning. This is actually, when I think of like pictures of my son, it's like all pictures of this from when he was little. That was actually from like a year ago. That was part of his costume. It's a little pumpkin hat. All right, so back to our title slide here. So, Pro JavaScript and CSS. Actually, we're going to give this talk a different name. It's going to be all of modern JavaScript in 45 minutes. Or maybe 48 minutes or 49 minutes. Sorry, Tobias. I might delay you a little bit. So let's throw out some buzzwords here. How about ES6, ES 2015, ECMAScript, Node.js, Yarn, Babel, NPM, Webpack, React.js, modules, and of course, these are all things we're going to talk about. And of course, we'll also talk about the 12 new things that JavaScript invents while we're giving this presentation. All right? It's funny because it hits home, doesn't it? All right, so modern JavaScript is a lot like Game of Thrones, naturally. In Game of Thrones, you have countless characters competing for power and dominance. And in JavaScript, you have countless libraries, and they're constantly competing with each other, and it's very confusing to know which one to use. Game of Thrones, you watch it and you become invested in it, and you love this character, and then unceremoniously, they just get killed, and they don't even make a big deal out of it, which is sort of similar to that application you wrote in hipster.js or whatever the latest thing was, only to read on Twitter that no self-respecting dev uses that crap anymore. I think I based that off of like tweet I actually saw at some point. So JavaScript's it's a great language. It's a weird language, but I want us all to be able to write amazing front ends, because obviously JavaScript is critically important, and so I want us as a community to be able to not just write JavaScript and make things that look good, but write pro JavaScript and really enjoy doing it. And this is what Webpack Encore is going to make possible, and actually very easy and pleasant and fun for us. So JavaScript is, why is it important? It just happens to be the language that runs in the browser, right? So that's basically, for the most of us, why we learn JavaScript. So here, let's open a JavaScript file here. We're going to console.log a message. So the really important thing, so I'm going to throw out a couple baseline things that many of you might know already, but just want to make sure. So JavaScript runs in the browser, but you can also run it on your server, so that's what Node is. So Node is just server-side JavaScript. Same way that PHP is JavaScript, or PHP is server-side language. So you can say node yay.js, and it runs. Okay, so that's all that Node is, server-side JavaScript. Node has two package managers. There's Yarn and NPM. They both do the same thing. They actually both read the same file. So we have composer.json, they have package.json. So they read the same file, so you can actually use them interchangeably. So you'll see me use Yarn, but it's all basically the same stuff. So those are Composer for Node. Great. So let's make a more interesting application. We're going to make a store for sheep. So here's our store here. We're going to loop over some products. The details of this are not actually important, but there's some JavaScript. We're going to include this on our page somewhere. So here's a twig template. We have our little script tag, life is good. And then when we load the page, all it does is loop over those products and console.log them. Great. So let's look at that same code done in a completely different language. So here we have, let's look at this. We have a class, we have a constructor. There's a let keyword, something going on down here where there's like an arrow. So that's something. So what language is this? JavaScript, right? Right? It's like probably half of you are like, it's JavaScript. And the other half are like, it's JavaScript? So the confusing thing is when you start looking at modern JavaScript, you'll see readmes. They'll be like, oh, you want to use my library? And they'll have example code like that. And you're like, huh? What is this? What is going on here? So this is JavaScript. Or actually, yes, JavaScript. But actually, ECMAScript is an important term. It has nothing to do with ectoplasm. It is actually the official name of JavaScript. So technically, anybody could create a JavaScript engine. So really, what is JavaScript? What is ECMAScript? It's the standard. Somebody said, here's how the language should work. Anybody can make an engine for it. In the same way that technically anybody could make a PHP engine. It could be built completely differently, right? And still work the same way. So ECMAScript is the standard. Oh, yes. And then, so these are three other terms you'll see a lot, ES6, ES2015, and Harmony. Those are three names for the same thing. And it takes a little while to navigate this. You're like, oh, they're talking about the same thing. So this is the 6th version of ECMAScript. So it's like, we got PHP 7. Well, this is sort of like their PHP 7, except they gave it 3 different names. And everyone kind of calls it something different. But it's all kind of the same stuff. You'll also start seeing ES7, which is the 7th version. So you'll see other versions as well. All right, so cool. So like ES6 was like a really, really big version. So in the same way that like PHP 5.3 gave us like namespaces and it was like a game changer, ES6 was like their game changer. So like many, many new features. So they actually have a class syntax with a constructor. You can extend classes. So it looks actually very PHP-like, which is cool. There's this let keyword, which is like var, but more hipster. There's also a const keyword, which is almost the same thing. So when you see let, just think var. There are subtle differences. You can learn about them. But basically, when you see let, it's basically doing the same thing as var. And you also have the weird at first, and then you fall in love with it, arrow syntax, which is actually just a shorthand for a callback. And it has a subtle difference as well, but basically, again, it's like when you look at this code, it is code. It's doing the same thing that it did before. It's basically just new syntax. But will it run in a browser, right? Because we all know CSS and JavaScript, right? It's like, oh, it didn't, breaks an IE9 or something like that. I can tell you with the resounding certainty that the answer to that question is maybe. So basically, no. It's not like unless, thank you, you run Camp University and everyone uses like the latest version of every browser, probably not. So cool. So that was really cool that I told you about those new features. Now we all just need to wait 5 years to use them. Awesome. Oh, wait, we don't because of something called Babel. Babel is a JavaScript transpiler, which means that it takes JavaScript and gives you JavaScript. It rewrites JavaScript to JavaScript. So the details of installing this aren't important. I want to give you guys a little bit of background about what's going on in the JavaScript world. But you don't have to worry about these details because this is actually something that Webpack Encore is going to take care of for you. But I want you to kind of realize this idea that there is something called Babel, and its job is to transpile things. So if you were going to use Babel directly, you could install it. There's the yarn add, composer require, basically. It would add that to your package.json. So package.json, composer.json. It's the same thing for those languages. And then it downloads things into a node_modules directory. So we put things in the vendor directory. They put things in the node_modules directory. It's really nice. It's all the exact same concepts that we're used to, just done in a different language. Like Composer, so Composer puts things in the vendor directory, but sometimes when you download a Composer package, it has an executable in it. And when that happens, it puts it in a vendor/bin directory. So vendor, bin, PHP units. Node has the same thing. It puts directories into your node modules directory, but sometimes there's an executable, and if there is, it puts it into the node modules.bin. So you'll see people like execute things that look like that. That's basically why. So here what we can do is we can actually point Babel at our original JavaScript file and tell it to output a new JavaScript file. And if we did that, of course, if we did this now, we'd actually change our script tag here to point to the final built one. If we did that, it doesn't actually do anything. It would actually, if you looked at the source code of the two, they would be exactly the same. So Babel can transpile anything. I changed it back to CoffeeScript. It helps in the next line. He wanted me to change that to actions or TypeScript. It can actually do CoffeeScript to normal JavaScript. It can transpile coffee to tea. And it can also, most importantly, transpile new JavaScript to old JavaScript. So this is the key here. We'll actually take your new fancy JavaScript and convert it into JavaScript that will run in all browsers. And each of these transformations is called a preset. So this is huge because it actually means that we can actually write new JavaScript. So normally, and this is something you don't need to worry about. I actually kept it in this slide because I want to show you things that you don't have to worry about in the future. Normally, you'd have to be aware of this. You'd have to install a library. You need to make a Babel RC configuration file. And once you've done that, then you can run the same command. And the source file looks like this. The end file looks like that. So you can actually see it's I had an arrow function. No, so I did not even realize that. So there's an arrow function basically up here normally. You can see the arrow function is what's kind of transpiled to the old function syntax. So cool. So now it's actually going to run. What's that? There is an arrow function? It's so subtle. Thank you. I was like, I can't believe I left it off. Yes, there is an arrow function. It's so, cute and small that I didn't even see it in my code. So the big takeaway why I want to go through this is that modern JavaScript has a build step. So you don't, for better or worse, you don't just open JavaScript files anymore and bang out code and just include that on your page. I mean, you can, but modern JavaScript has to go through a build step to take the new stuff into the old stuff. And this is true of React, Vue. They all basically integrate with Webpack so that you can transpile their code in a certain way. So one thing I want to talk about before we actually talk about Webpack Encore is JavaScript modules. So the classic problem is that if we want to organize our JavaScript files, we kind of have to, you kind of just got to remember, if you have 5 JavaScript files, you need to basically remember to just add 5 script tags to your page, or you need to use something that will put them all together in one file, but put them in the right order. Usually you open a JavaScript file, and if you use jQuery, for example, you'll just start using the $sign variable and just hope to God that it's actually, it exists on the page. So we're using global variables, and we're just hoping to God that they exist on the page. This is why JavaScript development feels dirty, because this is not, we would never do this in PHP. We would never just start using a random global variable inside of a file and be well, let's just hope it's there. So the way we program in Symfony is totally more mature than the way we typically program in JavaScript. So that's the problem. And so in ES6, they introduced the idea of modules, which means that a JavaScript file can actually export a value on the bottom. This is exporting a class, but it can actually export anything. So an array, an object, whatever you want. So you export a value, and then you can actually import that value from another JavaScript file. So import product collection from, and it's going to get that class. The / there in the path is important. So that's what tells it to look relative to this file. And then you don't need the .js on the end, but imagine there's a .js on the end. You don't need it. So that gives us the product collection, and we can actually use it, right? So it's it's a little bit different. It's similar to PHP require statements. It works a little bit differently, but this is really cool. I mean, actually, this is a game changer. We can actually write proper code and have be well, this file needs what's in that file, so I'm actually going to add an import statement for it. I don't need to just hope anymore. I'm not using global variables. So great, so let's use Babel again to transpile, because I said that's a new syntax for ES6, to transpile that from the new to the old. And then let's run it in a browser, and it doesn't work. Notice the error here is require is not defined. So this whole idea of a module system was first actually added in Node.js. Node.js is server-side. So they were well, it's really easy for us. Let's add a require keyword, and you can require another file. It's all running on the server side, so when I require another file, when you run your code, it goes and gets that code, and everything just works. So they invented this idea of this require function. They've had it for years and years and years. And then the rest of the JavaScript world said, let's standardize this. So they actually standardized around an import and export keyword. But it's basically the same thing. So sometimes you'll see the require keyword. Sometimes you'll see the import keyword. That's the history behind them. But they're both aiming to do the same thing. So what Babel did is Babel was I don't know, import is not, that's not an ES5. That's not an old JavaScript. So I'll just like change it back to a function called require. But require doesn't work in the browser because module loading in a browser is really hard to do because everything has to be done asynchronous. So if we have one file and it requires another file, we're just going to like wait for it to download and not give any loading screen. And if that one needs 3 other ones, we're just going to like wait some more. This whole requiring thing only works when you're on server-side language where basically hitting the file system is instantaneous. So module loading doesn't work in a browser. And that's where Webpack finally comes in. And this is actually going to make that possible, and that is going to change the way that you develop your front-end code. So it's called a bundler, module loader, all-around nice guy. So let's see how it works. So we're going to install Webpack, yarn add Webpack. Here's the exact same setup as before, so import, export, so that hasn't changed. And then this time, I'm not running Babel anymore, so forget about Babel for a second. I'm just running Webpack, pointing at the input file, same thing, giving it an output file. And then what it does is it actually dumps just a single file, the product app.js, my output file, but it contains the source code for both of them. So at first, that might sound cool, but like not that cool, because for years and years and years, we've had Ascetic or Gulp that has been able to take multiple JavaScript files and put them together. But we had to manage that. We had to say, well, in this JavaScript file, I'm pretty sure we like need jQuery and this other thing, so like let me put it in my list of things that should go together. That's not the case anymore. Webpack's actually going in and looking at your require statements and being like, yeah, I guess they're requiring this file, so I need to go get it and put it in here. So you're just coding like you should with import statements or require statements, and then Webpack's saying, I will do the heavy work of actually assembling this all together in one package that we can actually send out to the web. If you want to make Webpack easier to use, this is usually how you see it used. You define a webpack.config.js file. And the important thing here is see this entry product. An entry is basically a little JavaScript application. And you basically point it at one file, and this is going to end up building a product.js file. So if you have a single page app, you'll have one entry. It's app.js, right? And it points to your JavaScript file, and then you load whatever modules you need there, and it packages one JavaScript file. If you have a multi-page app, you might have one entry point that is kind of like your global, JavaScript for, for your layout or something. And then on individual pages, you would kind of create other entry points. Here's my entry point to kind of run my JavaScript on my product page or my checkout page. And we're going to talk more about that. So that's an entry. And then, of course, we define the output. I want to build it to web/build and give it the file name, which ends up being product.js. And this is going to output that product.js, which, of course, we include on the page down here. Okay? So this is typically how you see Webpack used. And this is the simplest version of Webpack. And it's fairly simple, and it's really, really powerful. So this time, now we can run Webpack without any arguments, because it's going to read the config file and put everything together for us. By the way, another way that you can run things in your .bin directory, and I have this later, so I wanted to show it now, is you can say yarn run and then your executable. So same thing. So you'll see me use that going forward. All right, great. So like the module loading is huge. We could stop right there, and it would be incredible. But in reality, once you get in this, there ends up being a lot more things that you want to add. You want to do production optimization. So like in production, it like uglifies things. You're going to want source maps. So like when you actually refresh your browser, it tells you like the error was on the correct file, not the compiled file. That's not helpful. Versioning, asset versioning. Actually, this won't make sense yet if you haven't seen it, but CSS handling and less handling, Sass handling. Webpack can actually handle your CSS for you, and it will. So there's a bunch of stuff that once you actually get into this, you realize it's a slippery slope, and you're like, oh, I have to add this, I have to add this. No problem. Webpack can do all of this stuff. And it's as easy as writing that code that you see there. Not pictured are the 1,000 ways that you can screw up and realize that not even realize that you're totally doing something wrong, and your final built files, like you didn't realize it's not being uglified, so it's like 8 megabytes large, and you didn't even realize it. So it turns out that Webpack is actually kind of hard. So this is where Webpack Encore comes in. So we wanted in the Symfony community to have a industry standard. Webpack is the industry standard. You see like big JavaScript libraries, they build themselves with Webpack. Webpack is the industry standard for solving this problem right now. There are others, but like this is the guy. So in the Symfony community, we wanted us to be able to use this tool, but not have to become like, get our PhD in Webpack config. So this is how we came up with the idea of Webpack Encore. And we're going to start over. So we installed Babel, we installed Webpack. Let's just clean up, okay? So let's undo everything we've done so far. I showed that to you so we could learn about module loading and all that. Now cleanse your palette, because this is going to be the experience that you're actually going to go through when you use Encore. Kind of like yesterday, we explained auto-wiring first, and then in like 2 minutes, I showed you how your experience would be. So let's have a nice Webpack experience now. In fact, I'm going to start really simple. So I'm going to start with just one JavaScript file. Notice this is not in my web directory. So this is not publicly accessible. That's cool. Once you have a build process, Webpack, you can move your stuff. You can put it in an assets directory, and then you'll output to a web directory. So not that it's the end of the world, but it's kind of cool that you don't have to have your source files in your web directory. So it's in an assets directory. All right, so let's install Encore, yarn add @symfony/webpack-encore. So that's cool. And then we still are going to create a webpack.config.js file. So we didn't like reinvent the wheel. We're like, let's leverage Webpack just to make it easier. So we have a webpack.config.js file. We use the require statement. Remember, this file is actually run by Node, so it can use the require statement just fine. So we use the require statement, get this nice Encore object, and we just start teaching it how we want it to act. We set an output path. We tell it, the public path is /build. By the way, if you want to use a CDN, you just change that set public path to your CDN, and everything's just going to work. Set your public path, and we're going to add one entry called app. That's going to be kind of our global layout sort of entry. And heck, we even have source maps automatically. So I'm going to have source maps on in dev and not on in production. And that's it. And down at the bottom, this is, you just say encore.getWebpackConfig. So not to like undersell how amazing Encore is, but it's ultimately just a Webpack config generator. We're using Webpack. We're using Webpack concepts. We're not reinventing the wheel. The idea of entry, as you saw earlier, entry is a Webpack term. So when you're using Encore, you're using the same terminology. So if you get like in a pinch or something or can't understand something and you're Googling, the Webpack documentation and terminology is relevant to us because we're not doing something completely different. In fact, down here, this gives you a big Webpack configuration object. You can, if you want to, then just keep modifying it. If there's some feature we don't support, change the config, add some more config. People do that all the time. All right, so to review, we've installed it. We have 7 lines of code here, and you'll even copy this from the docs. Actually, in Symfony Flex, when you install it, you'll just get this and a couple other things. And then we run it with yarn run Encore. And specifically yarn run Encore dev. There's also an Encore production. So there's a sub command that you run to tell it that you want to build in development or you want to build in production. Okay? And it creates, very simple, it's just the same thing we had before. It was just done in like 6 lines of code. It creates an app.js file, and then we include that in our base layout. Cool? There's also a manifest.json file. Ignore that for now. We'll talk about that. Right now, it just helps us build really nicely. All right, so yay, but I need my jQueries, So cool. So this is typically how you would have written code before. You would just like open a JavaScript file, and you just like, throw a lucky penny in a well and hope that jQuery is present, right? Because I'm using a $ variable there that is not defined anywhere. So now you're not going to do that anymore. You don't have to do that anymore. You just require it. Say var $ equals require jQuery. When you require things, by the way, you'll see me use require and import like back and forth. I'm just trying to show both. They do the exact same thing. It's just a syntax difference. So require and import is the same thing. When you require or import something that does not start with a /, you're saying I want to get this out of my node modules directory. So I want to get out of my vendor directory. So if we just did this and ran Webpack, you actually get a nice little error that says the dependency was not found. We have not installed jQuery. So it's actually going to say the dependency is not found, and it even gives you this npm install command. We're going to use yarn. There's a pull request on a library we use to change this to yarn. You'll see us use yarn in the docs. But it actually tells you exactly what to do, which is really cool. All right, so let's run yarn add jQuery. And that's actually going to put jQuery into our node modules directory. Okay, and then yarn run Encore, and it just works. The final app.js file now contains our code, and it also contains jQuery, because it just grabbed it and put it inside of there. By the way, there's also a, I won't show up, but a yarn run encore dev -- watch, of course. So you won't actually run the command over and over again. You'll just do -- watch, and it works just fine. All right, so, oh, man, this is where things get crazy. So CSS, if you think about it, it's sort of a dependency of your app. In a lot of cases, your JavaScript app, especially if you're building a pure JavaScript front end, it's a dependency. If I build some cool widget and I don't have the CSS for it, it might work, but it's going to look terrible. So if we want to have a standalone JavaScript app, our CSS should be part of that somehow. So wouldn't it be cool if we could actually require CSS files? And actually, you can do that. It just works. As soon as you require a CSS file, then it's actually going to dump an app.js and an app.css. And so, of course, yes, you need to go and add a link tag now for it. But you add the link tag for it, and it just works. So our app.js is actually becoming this standalone nice thing. You want bootstrap CSS? All right, so let's do yarn add bootstrap. Well, it should be -- dev. By the way, you'll see me do -- dev a lot. It's the same thing with composers, dev dependencies, and non-dev dependencies. It doesn't really matter. So let's do yarn add bootstrap. I'm going to go into that CSS file that I just added. And actually, so I'm in the CSS file that I just added, right? And I'm thinking, you know what? All of this CSS is really further styling bootstrap stuff and other things on my site. So from the CSS file's perspective, bootstrap is sort of a dependency of my CSS file. So you can actually use @import and bring it in. In this case, when you're inside of a CSS file, the tilde was their kind of special way of signaling I want to look in the node modules directory. Okay? What actually this path here is node modules /bootstrap /dist/css /bootstrap.css. So when you require JavaScript modules or import JavaScript modules, you usually just say require jQuery, and it knows which file to use. But you can also require import other specific files if you want to, and you do it just by doing the path to it. Cool. And then yarn run encore dev, and you don't make any other changes because the CSS file is now going to contain bootstrap. It's just going to put it in there for you. So let's talk about images, though. Images are kind of a problem. So if you imagine this, right, I'm referencing an images file. So this images directory is actually an assets /images /logo.png. It's not even publicly accessible. So not only are we moving this to a different destination, meaning we're actually changing the relative path here, the file's not even publicly accessible. Well, actually, Webpack takes care of this also. Well, Webpack Encore takes care of it. Webpack takes care of it if you do a bunch of configuration. What's going to happen here, actually, I'm going to back up and show you guys the previous example. Bootstrap actually internally has glyph icons. So in Bootstrap CSS, it has font tags. And they point to font files that are in the same directory as Bootstrap. So this problem we're talking about applies to images, but also applies to fonts anytime you reference a file in any of your CSS. So actually, as soon as we installed Bootstrap and ran yarn run encore dev, that's actually what our build directory looked like. It actually parses your image or your fonts, whatever files you reference in your CSS, and moves them into your build directory, and then changes the path inside the final CSS file to have the correct path to that thing. So you get to actually code correctly. You get to write your CSS file, use a relative path, the real relative path to that file at this moment, and you don't have to worry about well, what happens when they move around on production and this needs to be a different path or something. It takes care of all of that automatically for you. So when you stop thinking about our JavaScript as just random code, we need to think of it as a single application with dependencies. The images and the fonts are dependencies of your CSS. That's basically how you think of it. So Webpack actually looks through your CSS files and goes, hey, these are dependencies. Let's bring them along with us. And the CSS is a dependency of our JavaScript app. So everywhere, you're just requiring or pointing to files you need. And Webpack is the beast of burden that's actually putting this all together for us. All right, so what if we want to use Sass or less instead of CSS? All right, so let's just be as lazy as possible, and let's rename our app.css to app.scss, right? So I just decided I'm going to rename it and start using cool Sass features internally. So I'll rename it, and I'll change the require statement. That's all I'm going to do. Well, that's not going to work. But you do get this error that says, hey, I noticed you want to load a Sass file. If you want to load a Sass file, you just need to add one little line in your webpack.config.js. And by the way, Sass needs a couple of dependencies to actually work. So you also can just run this command. So we walk you through the process of things you want. We don't give you the kitchen sink. We didn't install Sass and less processing and all these things out of the box. But you just call one little function, and then you have access to them. So we're going to add .enable Sass loader, and then run this command down here, and then it just works. So we have Sass in one command and one line of code, or less, whatever you want. What about page-specific CSS? So again, so far this works well if we're building a single-page app, because we only have one JavaScript file. But now I don't have a single-page app. My company's not that hipster, so we have multiple pages. So we still have the app.js, which is our layout JavaScript file. But now we're going to create a product app.js, and we're going to import a CSS file. We're going to use jQuery, and we're going to log something. So this is going to go on a products page. So in Encore, you just add another entry. That's it. So one line here. You say, now I have another entry called product app, and here's the source file that it should read for that. Okay? And not surprisingly, that's just going to dump a product app.js and a product app.css file. And that's it. Okay? Yeah, so you can see now we have these two files down here. There's just one problem. We have too many jQueries going on. If you look at the built file, jQuery is in there. And also jQuery is in there. You notice how gigantic those files are. So that's a problem, right? So all you need to do is change, when you have a multi-page app, the one JavaScript file that you will include in your layout, you just change it from add entry to create shared entry. This is a very confusing thing in Webpack. It's super, super powerful, but it's very confusing. It's a thing called a commons chunk plugin, and there's all kinds of configuration you can use to hang yourself with it. So in Encore, you just basically say that I have this one file. What you're basically saying is app.js is included on my base layout. So therefore, for any of my other entries, if you see some code in any of my other entries, like product app, that is also included in app.js, don't include it again. Because app.js is going to be on every page. So now that it knows app.js is going to be on every page, it knows that jQuery is already going to be there. So it knows that it doesn't need to package it again in product app.js. So product app.js, you can see how small it is now. For one small performance reason, as soon as you have a shared entry, you'll actually notice there's suddenly a file called manifest.js that wasn't there before. This has been there the whole time. We haven't talked about that yet. But that file suddenly shows up. As soon as you add a shared entry, you also need to add a manifest.js to your base layout. This is a decision we made. It's actually for performance reasons. It's not really that important, but it's a good thing. All right, what about asset versioning? So, the whole thing where it's like I push a new change to my main.js and nobody sees it, and you're like, oh, but it was really cool. I wanted you guys to enjoy it. So you have to figure out how to bust your cache or rename your files, or add $v=1 to the, the path or something. So if you want asset versioning in Encore, you just call a function. And what's going to happen is all of a sudden, all of your files that it outputs have a hash on it, and this hash comes from the content of the file. It only changes when the content of the file changes. Great? So amazing, automatic cache busting. We've solved the problem. Oh, wait, no, we haven't, because now our whole app is broken. Because these paths are constantly going to be changing. So we have a problem, right? Well, this is where the manifest.json file, finally, that we've been ignoring so far, comes in handy. Manifest.json file, which you notice is the only one here that it does not have a versioned name on it, looks like this. It's a map from the original source file name to the final built file name. So if, oh man, hold on, dang, if we could just get the asset function to somehow read that and do the transformation for us, it would just work. So it's just that one line of code. This is in config.yml or framework.yaml in Symfony 4. It's under the assets key, and you just say JSON manifest path, and you point it to the manifest path, and that's it. And then everything that you have, all of your asset calls are going to go through that map first. And so basically here you have free versioning with one line of code and one line of code here. By the way, even that line of code, if you use Flex, is going to get put there for you. So once you install Encore, it's already there. So now that you have this, and you might not think about it, but I'm not going to talk too much about it, but you should add long-term caching to your assets. So you can actually very, very safely go to your Nginx configuration or your CDN and say cache, have the user's browser cache every single file for 1 year, forever. You don't, and it will basically improve their performance. They will literally just make a request to download the files on their first page, and when they go to the second page, there won't be any requests made. And you can fully and safely do this on your next deploy. If you change one JavaScript file, only that one JavaScript file's hash is going to change. So a little bit different than the asset versioning in Symfony, where you can do this with the configuration. You can say what version of your assets are, but it affects every single asset in your entire system. It changes the version for all of them. So this is on a file-by-file basis. All right. So I promise I'm almost done here. This presentation needs more buzzwords. So let's talk about React real quick. And actually, this is one of the most important things. Like when you talk about, if you want to use React or Vue, you kind of can't ignore this stuff because you need a build step. They give you, there's like a React generator and a Vue skeleton. They actually, there's ways, they try to make it as easy as possible. But the point is you're going to be using probably Webpack because you need to do a transformation when you're using front-end frameworks. So it kind of makes it hard to get into sometimes because you're like, can't I just open a JavaScript file and start coding? And they're like, no. All right, so we're going to talk about React real quick. One of the issues when you're going from like the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things is that you will not have any JavaScript in your templates at all anymore. We are always not supposed to do that, right? But then like when no one else was looking, we did it anyways. So what that makes difficult is sometimes, who here is like set a JavaScript variable in a template to something that you printed from Twig? Yeah, right? It's like really convenient. You'd be like, var products equals, and then, yeah, curly, and print something out, right? Well, you can't do that anymore. So the way to do that, though, is to leverage data attributes. So in this case, we're just going to add a data-products. And then here, I'm taking some products variable, maybe I'm JSON encoding it, and so I'm putting it there. And then in your external JavaScript file, you're going to read that there. So it's a very simple solution. That's the way that you solve this. By the way, we don't normally have to worry about piping things through escape, but fun fact, you can pipe things through escape and say HTML_ATTR, and that will actually make whatever you're printing safe to live in an HTML attribute. So it'll escape them so you don't have like a quote that kills things. So that value is now safely sitting there. And so I'm not going to go into React specifics, but here's a very simple React app. I'm importing React and React DOM, and I'm doing some crazy React things down here. If you haven't seen React before, this is actually valid code, this HTML-looking thing down here. And I'm not using jQuery, but here, you can see I'm getting my element by ID, and then I'm calling dataset. That's how you read data attributes. If you use jQuery, you can always also say jQuery my element.data. That's usually how you see it. It's very easy to read the data off of there. So cool. So I got really excited. I wrote my new React app, and then I run it, and it doesn't work. And that's because this syntax here, this HTML syntax, is actually something special to React. Well, it's technically called JSX, but it's more or less a React thing. So React has its own special syntax that needs to be transpiled to real JavaScript code. So you can't just run, this is why you can't just run React code, or at least not if you code it the way that most people do. So how do we fix that? You just call one function, enable React preset. There's also an enable Vue loader and an enable TypeScript loader. So for all these different, like the most common things, you just call one line, and we're going to start processing it through that. Now, as soon as you run that, because again, I want to be as dumb as possible, as soon as you run that, we're actually going to tell you that you need another dependency. We're going to say we didn't package the React handling with Encore, so you just need to run this yarn add Babel preset React thing so that Encore can use it. So we had a debate. I was like, do we ship everything with Encore and it's like overwhelm people or not? So we decided not to, but then to like work really hard on really great error messages that like walk you through the process. So usually you can just start calling methods on Encore, be like, oh, there's a method called enable PostCSS. What's PostCSS? Oh, that looks cool. Let me call it. Well, you can just call that function, and then we'll tell you what else you need to do after when you run Encore. So that's it. It's just that one line of code, that one command, and all of a sudden we're programming in React. So there's lots and lots of features built into Encore, and for the most part they just work, or there's one line of code to enable them. One feature that the speaker yesterday talked about that's really cool, that is a Webpack feature. So you just get it if you use Webpack. It's called code splitting. And this is basically an asynchronous require call. So normally if you have require, or import on the top, it's going to put all of that code into your final JavaScript file, which is usually what you want. But occasionally you have some big thing you want to require, but the user may or may not need it, right? They might only need it if they like click a certain link to bring up a modal or something like that. So you're like, do I really want to package this giant thing in my final file, even though only 10% of our users are going to need it? Well, that's code splitting. That's what I said is basically like a asynchronous import. So your import statement looks slightly different, but then at the moment that you hit that code, all of a sudden Webpack's going to go and make an AJAX call and return it from you. So it's really, really, really powerful. Yes, and Encore is the life of any party. So putting all these things together. So there's a new, almost 3 years old version of JavaScript. It's not supported by all browsers, but that's okay because we use Babel to like turn our new trendy hipster JavaScript into like old boring JavaScript. So it takes care of that for us. By the way, Encore just runs Babel for you. If you use Webpack, you have to configure Babel with Webpack. When you use Encore, it's already happening. So this is just happening in the background. Webpack is the industry standard tool that's going to allow us to use the require statement and bundle everything together. And Encore is a tool that makes using Webpack not suck. In fact, it makes using Webpack really, really fun and enjoyable. So I gave a version of this presentation for the first time last year, and it was before Encore existed. It was just a presentation on Webpack. So as long as this was, it was probably twice as long. So we had to explain that big, long configuration. And I had this slide in there because it's funny, and it's sort of true. But it's not as true anymore. Like the JavaScript world is starting to settle down around a few things, like React and Vue and Angular. They've been around for a while. Webpack really is the standard. And especially when you use Encore, we've done a lot of research and have selected really good vendors behind the scenes and libraries behind the scenes so that you don't have to think about which library should I use for like node processing or like versioning or that kind of stuff. So it's actually a relatively safe time to dive into this stuff and start writing like really pro JavaScript. We can finally write JavaScript that we're actually proud of, that you can test if you want to. So that's what I want you guys to take away from this and do it. So yes, thank you. So I do have the joined in link there. Please give me feedback. I'll give this presentation again in about a month in Europe. So if there's some things that were confusing or too fast, then I would love to hear that. And again, we have a Webpack tutorial on Cambridge University. So if you want to get further into Webpack and the module loading, code splitting, that kind of stuff, check that out. Questions? Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about like production deployment?
Good. Yeah, that was the question I was expecting. What about production deployments? So it does get a little bit trickier because now you need to like build your assets before you go to production. So there's basically two ways to do it. There's the easier way, that is the dirtier way. It entirely depends on how you deploy, of course, right? But you can install a node on your server, and then when you deploy, you do your git pull or however you deploy, you can then build your assets. Okay, that sucks because your node is deployed on your production server just so that you can build the assets, just for like the couple of seconds while your assets are building it, and then it's not needed. It also kind of sucks because you're running this big command on your production server, so for however many seconds it takes, you're like knocking your servers down. But that's the easiest way to do it. And actually on Cambridge University, that's how we do it right now, because we're like, we're too busy, we don't care, we'll do it, do it some other way. The other way to do it is to do it on a different server and then make it part of your deploy process. So if you have a nice build process already, this is going to be very easy. You're just going to build those assets and then put them in your final package. If you're using something like, we were talking about this 2 days ago, if you're using something like Ancestrano or Deployer, with those deploy strategies, typically what you're doing, you can do it however you want, but typically the most common way when you're deploying with those is you use those tools to ultimately, they help you run like a git clone on the server. So things are still happening on the server, and if you do a git clone on the server, your assets aren't going to be there because your build directory should be git ignored. So, but one of the things you could do is you could actually, as part of your build process, say, okay, like clone my code, but then run Encore locally, and then copy those files up. Ancestrano and deploy both have a way to say like, oh, I have some local files here or a local directory that I want to copy up to the server. So you can do that as well. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Yep. Cool. Good question. Does Encore work without Symfony, and therefore, how does versioning work? You nailed it. That's like there's actually no integration at all between Symfony and Webpack Encore, other than like we wanted to make something nice and and that feels very good to Symfony developers. So yeah, the only integration was that one spot, right, with where the asset function read the versioning. So if you're going to use Encore out of Symfony, the only thing that's not going to work automatically is that versioning thing. When you enable versioning, you're going to be responsible for writing something in your app that reads that manifest.json file and then does the transformation. If, in most applications, that's very easy. If you have a legacy application where you have all of your paths hard-coded, it's like script src equals, then you don't have a hook to do it, it's going to take a little bit more work. But that's the only thing you need to do to use this outside of Symfony. But of course, why would you not use Symfony, right? Any other questions? Yep, back there. Yeah, really good question, and I realized I didn't talk about that. So you want to commit everything to your repository. It's like the best practice is you commit everything except for your build directory. So when we set up Encore, we said I want to output things into web/build. So web/build would go into your gitignore file. If you use Flex, that's a gitignore rule that's automatically put into your file. So, and again, there's actually a third way to deploy your assets. And the dirtiest one is to ignore that advice and commit the web/build directory. And then on deploy, it's naturally going to be there. So I'm going to tell you not to do that, but I'm not really going to tell you not to do that. Yeah.
So would you include the node modules in the Git repository?
Oh, good. That's the other one. Yeah, thank you. And the node modules is also ignored. Yep. And the node modules is ignored for the same reason we ignore our vendor directory, because you can just run yarn install and it'll download everything. All right, I'm going to stop there because I'm past time. If you guys have more questions, come and find me, or feedback if you've used it so we can help make it better. So yeah, thank you guys.